We're live.
We're live. Wait, are we?
Should we refresh?
Oh yeah, let me refresh. Oh, we're live.
We're live. Hello. Well, I'm Ethel. I am a Quantitative User Experience Researcher at Google, and this is my colleague Connor. And today we have a Ask Me Anything. Oh, if you want to ask Connor anything, subscribe to his channel.
Link in bio.
But today we're talking about quant UXRs.
Yeah. Super excited. Yeah, I have a long list of questions for you.
Oh my God. Okay, I hope you have 5 hours to dial in.
Exactly. Yeah. But there will be a recording posted after, so
That's
we'd love
true.
to see the engagement, love to see comments. We're happy to respond to comments in the comment section as well if there are any questions post live stream. But how about we get started?
Let's get started.
So Ethel, I'd love to hear about your path to quantitative user experience research.
Yeah, for sure. So I've been a quant UXR for about 3 years now, so it's still relatively recent. But I would say it's definitely not a straight line. I kind of meandered a little bit and just kind of fell into this field, which ended up being something that I really enjoy doing. But kind of long story short, I pivoted my career. So I was in finance and consulting, and then I wanted to do something more technical. So I went back to school and got my master's degree in data science, and that enabled me to transition into something more technical. But I didn't become a quant UXR directly after that. I actually changed roles a couple times, being a data science consultant, and then like being an analyst at Google. And then eventually within Google, I made the transition to become a quant user experience researcher. So it's kind of a long journey. I would say overall it took me 6 years in total. And I wouldn't say that I planned for this career, but I was really lucky that I found out that this is something that aligns so well with my passion, because I'm really interested in just using data to improve people's lives. And I feel like a quant UXR does exactly that.
Awesome. Yeah, that's super interesting. And I'd love to hear more about what differentiates quant UXR from data science, because I often hear, that there might be some overlap in terms of the skills. Data science is usually thought of as like sort of an intersectional, interdisciplinary field where it's sort of a combination of statistics, subject matter expertise, as well as computer science. So I'd love to hear about what quant UXR is relative to data science.
Yeah, so I would say maybe overall the biggest distinction is about the user experience part, because for user experience researchers, we're focusing on understanding our users. So for data scientists, maybe our methodologies are very similar, but our focuses are very different. So as a UX researcher, you really want to kind of think like a user, like try to be the advocate for your users and know their pain points pretty well and have a good grasp of what's, I guess, not so great for them and what they like about certain things. So that's the ultimate goal for a user experience researcher. For a data scientist, I think maybe we're using the same methodologies like surveys or live experiments or LEs. But data scientists might be thinking about other objectives, like how do I make the model more efficient, or if this specific feature is performing well, and by well that can mean like monetization wise and other things. But for a user experience researcher, we're focusing on improving the user experience. So ultimately that's our, I would say, North Star metric. It just, our guiding light is our users. And I would say that's the key differentiator with a career in data science. Not so much the methodology part, more so about the ultimate goal, and I guess also the affiliation, like we affiliate ourselves with our users and try to be the advocates for our users.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I love that framing of being an advocate for the user. I would love to hear about what methods you use to measure, success in a role like quantitative user experience research. How do you see if, the experience for users is improving or the opposite?
Yeah, so specifically about like how to understand users in a quantitative way, right? Mm-hmm. So I would say there are many different methodologies, but I will probably break it down into 3 different areas. And this can overlap a lot with a data science career. So if you have any questions, feel free to pop it into the chat. So I would say the first of the 3 areas would be surveys. I would say that's very common for quant user experience researchers, because that's a really good way for you to hear directly from your users. So survey methodology is very important, and you can ask survey questions in many different ways, and the difference between a quant and a qual researcher would be for a core researcher, you can sit down with a user and ask them questions one-on-one, but as a quant, you want to do this at a large scale. So doing one-on-one interviews is not as possible. So surveys would be one, so you can have a large audience and you can collect information from users at a large scale. And then the second one would be logs analysis, meaning that you can look into the interactions of users through the backend database and kind of using proxies to figure out how the user's interaction is. I do want to clarify one thing though, like we don't look at specific users' interactions. So if Connor searched for something on Google, I would not be able to see that Connor specifically did.
I'd hope not.
No, I already know everything you search for, so I don't need to use the database. But yeah, so everything that we look at are basically anonymized, and we aggregate things, meaning that ultimately, as a quant, we want to look at things at large scale, right? That also gives us the statistical significance. So there's no need for us to just pick out Connor and try to understand like what he specifically does. But then that logs analysis can give us a pretty good understanding of the actual interactions of users with the products that you're looking at.
Right.
So that will be a second methodology. And then the last one would be live experiments. So I would say this one overlaps a lot with a lot of other technical roles, and it's not so common within quant UXRs. But as I said earlier, because as quant UXRs, our main goal is to serve the users. So if we're going to launch a feature, then we do want to test it out to see if it's going to impact users negatively or positively. So LE would be a live experiments would be another methodology that you can use to reach your users and get their feedback. And the last one, you might combine that with a survey and with logs, but then the setup of the LE itself can be something a researcher can do as well.
Interesting, cool. Yeah, and going back to, I like how you distinguish being like a traditional UXR versus a quant UXR, right, and how scale comes into play, and like how much value there is there.
Yeah.
I imagine that it's difficult and you'd have to work very cross-functionally. So I'd love to hear more about like what cross-functional work looks like as a qUXR, like who are your common stakeholders in terms of conducting research as a qUXR.
Yeah. Oh my God. Actually, this is a long list. But I would say it also depends on your product and also the specific team that you're in. So probably not a fully representative list, but at least based on my experience, your common stakeholders, I would say, are probably from 3 different areas. One is the product managers. So they set the direction for the product. So as an advocate for the users, you need to have very close relationship with the product manager to make sure that you can influence the roadmap of the product based on the user feedback. So that's very important. And the second one would be other researchers, as you said, like qual researchers, because a lot of times combining the qual research with the quant research is very powerful. So for example, with a qual research, maybe you saw a couple of things that users kept bringing up, but you only have 5 users that you talk to one-on-one. So this might be a good collaboration opportunity that as a quant, you start asking those hypotheses in your surveys, for example, to see, okay, at a large scale, do all the users or most of the users have those problems as well? So your core researchers is definitely another stakeholder. Actually, I'm going to extend that a little bit, just people in UX, user experience in general. So that can be your designers as well. And that can also be user experience engineers sometimes. So depending on how big your user experience team might be, but I will group all the UX related stakeholders into the second group. And then the last group will be your engineers. So these are the people who are actually building the product. Right. So knowing how much it takes for them to build certain things is super helpful. A lot of times you need to do kind of a trade-off negotiation with the engineers because they don't have unlimited resources, right? So they want to know, okay, what is actually absolutely necessary and what is good to have. And then being the advocate for the users, you can help steer the engineering team on which direction they should focus more energy on. Because maybe there's something that would take, like, I don't know, 4 months to build, but your research shows that 99% of the users had a really big problem with it. So maybe it's worth it, even though we're gonna invest 4 months of engineering work into it. Yeah, so I would say those 3 areas are the main stakeholders. But of course, there's so many other functions that can come into play, like program managers and also just sometimes leads in general, right? Like if, maybe for smaller companies, it will be a CEO. You just need to keep them posted. And one that's not so obvious because they don't really show up in your day-to-day alignment conversation is actually your users. I feel like as a user experience researcher, I take a lot of responsibility in making sure that I'm representing my users in the right way. Yeah, so like I guess those are kind of broad stakeholders, but in your day-to-day, those 3 groups are kind of the people that you have to talk to almost every single day.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And going back to how you're talking about you sometimes have to sort of negotiate prioritization. I'm curious as to what dimensions you look at within like a research plan and how you prioritize research when you get pushback from certain stakeholders.
Yeah, so prioritize what research to do. Do you mean?
Yeah, so like if your research plan is like the scope is too large and product managers or eng is like pressuring you to pare back your different research questions, how do you decide what to prioritize and what to deprioritize?
Yeah, that's definitely an art. I wouldn't say that I have the ultimate solution to that. But how it usually happens is that there's definitely a trade-off in research between more fundamental studies versus the more feature-specific studies. So the fundamental studies are really helpful for you to just understand the product market fit in general, right? Kind of set kind of longer term vision-wise directions. But a lot of times you do have the pressure from your eng or PM that you really want to know if this specific feature is going to work. I'm going to use an example, like if this specific button should be on the right side or the left side, like which color is the best. So a lot of times you kind of are asked to step in to be the tiebreaker between multiple stakeholders, right? So I think what's really important is just to keep the communication open. I know this is a very unsatisfactory answer, but I don't think there is a single solution to this.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think what's really good for a career in quant research is that you get alignment from your stakeholders and make sure everybody is on the same page. And of course, like, maybe here's when you use your empathy as a researcher again to really listen to your stakeholders to see, like, why do you think this particular question is important? And we try to frame everything as a research question. And so like kind of a hypothesis of like maybe, and just like I hypothesize that the button B on the right is just like too hard to see, and PM is just like, but everything else in the whole suite of products is on the right-hand side, so it needs to be on the right-hand side, things like that, right? So understanding where they're coming from and having those options and listing out the different options. And actually there is a framework. I'm not saying that is the solution, but there is an ICE framework that you can use. I use from time to time to kind of stack rank the different questions people might have. So it doesn't solve everything, but it gives people a framework to think a little bit deeper about, okay, what exactly is the question that I'm trying to answer and how important it is compared to all the other questions that people are trying to get answers to. So the ICE framework is importance, confidence, and effort. So you ask people like, okay, what are your hypotheses? And you combine them all, and then you kind of rank them by these 3 dimensions: how important it is to answer this question, and how confident are we that like this is gonna make the product better, and then lastly, how much effort it will take us to answer those questions. So as you can see, like there are already 3 dimensions. So it doesn't mean that you can come up with a really clean ranking, but it will be one way to push your stakeholders to think a little bit more about, okay, what are we really trying to do here? So maybe that's a conversation starter for people to stack rank things and come to the same page. But that conversation is just so crucial to have, and it can go any direction, you know, but it's just more so the process of doing it, taking the due diligence of doing that is more important. And a lot of times maybe there is also a question, a balance between, okay, like, should I do what I think might be the best for the users, or should we just iteratively test things, and then maybe the fundamental things will show up in a later stage. So yeah, really like unsatisfactory question. Sorry, your question is so unsatisfactory. No, I mean, my answer is so unsatisfactory.
All right, where's the door?
No. I mean, it's just really a non-answer answer, but that's just the reality of the work.
Yeah. And I feel like that's the reality for a lot of cross-functional work.
Yeah.
There's not like a concrete framework to follow.
Yeah.
I would love to get a better sense of how hypothesis generation works within your role.
Yeah.
You did sort of touch on how sometimes you might have like live interviews from the qual UXRs, and then you might want to test out some kind of user experience on a larger sample to see if it's impacting more users.
Yeah.
I would love to get a sense of how hypothesis generation works and how you plan research.
Yeah, for sure. So really good question. I would say this is probably the most important part of doing any research. So definitely start from that. And if you're preparing for a career in that, like, try to frame everything into like hypotheses, right? Like, what are some research questions that I have? Coming up with the hypotheses, though, I would say kind of depends on the stage of your product. So if your product is really brand new, like it hasn't even been built yet, it's just an idea, then I think it's mostly just like people talking to each other. So people who wanted to start the product are talking about, oh, I think there is a need there. But then once you're able to spend a little bit more time, or if you have a prototype, then it's easier to ask more in-depth questions, right? And then sometimes we maybe there is a market report, you know, like just marketing has done something, or maybe you just saw it online that, let's think of a random example, I don't know, like sparkling water. Like, do users like it? And maybe there's
sponsor.
Not sponsored, I need to cover this up. I made this myself.
Yeah, no free advertising.
But if you want to collab, please send us a message later. Yeah, like, do people like sparkling waters? Like, maybe I'm thinking about a different flavor for sparkling waters, and cookies and cream, like as sparkling water. And maybe there is a marketing report somewhere already, like when at the initial stage of your product development, then you probably need to rely on those things. So you saw that 80% of the population drinks sparkling water, so that is a good indication, right? And then you look into, maybe there's a marketing report on just like the top flavors in general, and you saw that cookies and cream is like number 10, so that's like pretty good. So you can start testing things based on the things that you already know about the general public already. But once you're further along in your product development cycle, then you can start doing like core research and all those kind of things. And that can be where the hypotheses come from. But even for those research to happen, I guess initially you do need to do some guesswork, but ideally based on something that you already know about the users, like the general public. But I would say, okay, maybe two sources. Something that you already know about the users, and the other is really just gut instinct, unfortunately. But from your stakeholders, it's so important to involve them in the conversation to make sure that they kind of have some contribution to this whole process. So also getting that alignment earlier on than later really makes it easier for you to get buy-in in general. So kind of a combination of things you already know that can be from the very early stage, just like marketing research, and later on it can be previous research that has already indicated something, but you can never get rid of kind of that gut feeling. And people will have gut feeling, but sometimes they're right because they have been working on the product for so long, so they kind of know like this is the issue that kept popping up. So it's kind of a mixture of the two.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll maybe zoom out a little bit just about like the role of quant user experience research, just because, you know, I think the role is not as known in the industry. So I'd love to get a sense of how you feel quant UXR at Google is
Right.
representative of quant UXR across industry, or what makes it
Yeah.
unique, or if you have any insights into that.
Yeah, I have to say, like, this is a very niche role.
Mhm.
I think within Google, we have probably less than 200 people,
Oh,
like
wow.
globally, who are quant UXRs. And then in the industry, I think nowadays there are more companies that have this role, but previously it was really just big tech companies. I know
Right.
Meta has this role, and then Google, of course, and the role has only been around for maybe a decade or so. So it's still relatively new. Overall, I think the reason is probably because of what we do is at an intersection of so many things. So I'll get into like what exactly they do in a little bit, but I would say for now this role is still with bigger companies because
Right.
it's kind of a very specific slice of user experience research, right? And then
Mhm.
you kind of need to have enough resources to get somebody to work on something a little bit more specialized.
Right.
And the definition is slightly different among different tech companies, even.
Okay.
But I'm going to talk a little bit more about like my experience so far about what I do and compare that with what other companies are doing. But I would say in general, just think of it as understanding users at a large scale.
Right.
So to do that, like for example, we talk about the main three methodologies. So all of those is for us to be able to understand users at a large scale. And the fact that it was formed is more so because of the user experience focus.
Okay.
So it's kind of grew from the necessity of, for example, Google having so many users.
Yeah.
So it's not enough to just do core research, right? Like
Right.
one-on-one. If you want to one-on-one interview all of the Google users, that's gonna take ages, like Googlean years. I don't know. Google is a number, right?
Yeah.
So it kind of stemmed from that. Like
Okay.
with a larger company with more resources, with more workforce, and with more users, right?
Right.
Then you can have this overlap to have somebody who's specifically studying a bunch of
Mhm.
users. Yeah, and then we tend to talk about the main methodologies that we use
Right.
already a little bit. So those are the things that I mostly do. Compared to other companies, though, I would say I have heard that some companies care more about the surveys.
Okay.
Some companies care more about mixed methods. So like quant researchers are more like mixed methods. So maybe
Mhm.
you will also like do diary studies, which is more of a qual research methodology. Yeah, but for some other companies, qual researchers and quant researchers both do that. So
Right.
I would say if you're interested in this field, definitely look into the job posting or maybe talk to people in the industry to understand it a little bit more, because the field is pretty niche and pretty new. So everybody's still defining it right now. It's kind of like when data science was popular at the
Right.
beginning. Like
Yeah.
everything is data science and it's covering so many things. So kind of do your due diligence a little bit.
Awesome. Yeah. No, I'm a big fan of non-linear career paths, or
Yeah.
when you didn't necessarily go to school thinking that you'd end up in the role that you are in.
Yeah.
I'd love to get a better sense of the quant UX researchers that you work with at Google, or that you
Yeah.
know at Google. Do you have a sense of what their career path has looked like, and whether it
Yeah.
looks similar to yours, coming from, finance and then into data science and then into quant UXR? Is it similar
Yeah.
to that, or is it sort of diverse?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty diverse now.
Mhm.
Previously, especially when it first started, with just like one person at Google, actually. I think
Wow.
quant UXR, the whole role started at Google. And I think there is a book that she talked about how he started everything. So if you're interested, I'm going to link that in the comment section later. So definitely check that out if you're interested in the history of that. But at the beginning, I would say it's mostly from people who have been in user experience already.
I see.
And then mostly people who have really high degrees, maybe even like a PhD in psychology, things like that. So people who are really technical, but also have experience with user experience.
Right.
But then that evolved a little bit more. Though when I say evolve, is still kind of relative, right? Because it's still such a niche area. So for example, we only have like less than 200 people. So within this is impossible to be too diverse, I guess.
Right.
Is represented by about 200 people in general. But I do see that a lot of people kind of do not have that linear path either, especially because it's a newer role, right?
Right,
So most of
right.
the people have done other things before joining it. So I do appreciate that about people who are in the same field. And recently I also see that more and more people without PhDs are
Right.
in this role. Because I think when I joined, maybe 90% of the people have PhDs,
Oh,
and
wow.
I personally do not have one. I really admire the people who got their PhDs. So I guess when I first got in, even I thought that I was super lucky. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, my background give me that user empathy and the technical skills, but there wasn't any training even to like specifically for you to become a quant researcher, right? Now we have human computer interactions, which is like one like pretty common degree to get into this field. But back then that wasn't even a field actually. So you kind of just come in from so many different fields, but you have the common passion of understanding users at a large scale.
Cool.
Yeah.
I sort of have a curveball question for you.
Oh, wow. Okay, let me take a sip of water.
Yeah, you're gonna need it.
I might spit it out though.
Okay, so I'm curious as to, I know AI has been talked about a lot, and large language models have been talked about a lot. I'm curious as to within quant-UXR, how you see AI and large language models either impacting or improving the work that you do in your day-to-day, or if it already has. I'd love to hear.
I love this question. I mean, like, did you do some research about my background and methodology?
Of course I did. Yeah, I have to.
Wow. I don't know if it's a curveball. I think it's just like it's a planted question now. Because if you don't know, I'm passionate about programming and I love just large language models in general. Actually, when I first started working as a quant UXR, my main goal is actually to use language models to help me understand users better.
Awesome.
So my perspective is going to be super biased, but I'll try to be more objective because I think it's definitely changing the role a little bit. It's changing how we're working a little bit, but overall not so much yet. But it's changing how we work in two ways though. First, it actually opened up a different field for us to do research in. So
interesting.
For example, like Google has Gemini, right? So you can actually do research on how people interact with AI. So that's like a new opportunity, a new field, but you can apply the same methodologies just with a different type of interaction that has never existed before. Like users have never interacted directly with large language models before. So that's a new area for you to understand, oh, like what is this very novel way of interacting. So that's one opportunity actually. And the second way that AI has changed our field is it can be a collaborator. And I'm saying this with kind of a caveat. Some people are saying that maybe they're going to replace researchers. I personally still do not believe that, but I think it's good enough that you can really fast track some of your work already. I actually have done a couple of talks around this, like how I built a text clustering model for researchers to just like understand user feedback a little bit faster, grouping things into themes and all that, like a more programmatic way of thematic coding for researchers. So I still use that every single day, and it can just be like sometimes I do that with my own documents, just like what did I think recently, and then I just like pipe that through large language models. It's like, oh, okay, like these are the main things that I've been working on. So in that case, I feel like it's really helping me to be more efficient at work, or should I say higher velocity, which is the theme. So I would say from a very biased perspective, I think it only opened up more opportunities for this field. And I don't know what's going to happen in the future. Like maybe it will be more powerful. Maybe it can write surveys on its own, but at the current capacity, it's a collaborator. It's definitely not a leader.
Yeah, no, I'd love to get a sense for the audience out there, anyone interested so far in quantitative user experience research.
Let's check.
What recommendations would you have for someone wanting to get into the field?
Yeah. Okay. So, wow. Well, because my journey was so non-linear, so it's hard to say like what I did right versus wrong. I would say maybe the most important thing would be to just talk to people who are in the field to get a better understanding of if you're interested in this. And the second thing is probably patience, because it's still a pretty niche field. So it might take some time if you're truly interested in this for an opportunity to show up. And will be the next thing. I would say maybe the last thing is that your journey as a quantitative user experience researcher doesn't have to start with a job.
Right.
I think you can even just do it on the side. And I feel like that's one thing that I did no matter what position I had. And then when I realized that quant user experience researcher is a role, and it was, oh my God, this is exactly what I wanted to do. But what I meant by that was that I actually already started doing social listening even before I started working for Google. But it's like kind of a longer story, but overall it's so stupid. But but when Game of Thrones was so popular, I had an argument with my friend on like whether the ending of the show was satisfactory, and then I was very unhappy with the ending, and she was like, no, I think like I think she deserved it, the main character. So I, of course, being so humble and so willing to accept my failure, I was like, I don't believe that. Let me go online to see what people are talking on social media. So what I did, little did I know, was already a user research.
Cool.
I scraped Twitter back then. Now it's called X. I scraped Twitter for just like what people were talking about, and then I clustered their responses, and then I kind of grouped them by how many posts mention each character, and then what's the sentiment of that post.
Cool.
So I had a whole bar chart of like for each character, so many posts were about them, and then the post is mostly on average like positive or negative. So I think in the end I had an indication of like people are very positive about Jon Snow in general, but overall relatively negative about what happened to the main character. Well, I forgot her name. Khaleesi. I don't remember her name. Anyways, it was just a fun side project. I do not remember anything anymore. But then that whole process itself was actually quantitative user experience research. I just didn't know that my users at the time was everybody who was on social media, who have watched Game of Thrones and wanted to say something. And then the research part is really, I have a hypothesis of like for certain characters, people are feeling pretty negative about what happened to them, right? And then my methodology was using large language models. At the time, it was actually like small language models. To do analysis. So your journey can start at any time, actually, as a quant user experience researcher. So you don't have to wait until an opportunity show up. But if you're really passionate about the general idea of understanding users at scale, you can do it every single day. Unfortunately, you might not be paid for that, but you will have the experience of doing that.
Yeah, no, I love the sort of self-learning approach through, doing your own small projects on things that you're interested in. But no, that sounds super cool. Let's see if there are any questions from the chat.
Let's take a look.
Looks like we have Alex, who's a fan of ICE, the ICE method.
Oh, nice. Yeah. We see somebody knows about it. Oh, actually, Alex and I work together. He is a PM. So
awesome. Shout out, Alex.
So yeah, Alex introduced the ICE methodology to me. So love that. Shout out. Cool. Anybody else?
No, it looks like anyone who has questions, feel free to leave them in the chat. Happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, and we're also happy to schedule another one if you're interested.
Yeah, follow up.
Yeah, there will be a recording. So if you're watching the recording and you have some questions still, I'm gonna recruit Connor again. He needs some good karma, so I'm just recruiting him for a follow up if you're interested.
Well,
yeah.
Those were all the questions that I had.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a great chat. I learned a lot.
Yeah. And I hope that you were also happy about what we're talking about. If you're not, you can also leave a comment, and then I'll do my language models on your Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for joining.
Yeah, I'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.